It was a crisp, frost-laden morning in January 2022, the kind where the sunlight glinted off icy sidewalks and the air carried a sharp, biting edge. Inside the sleek glass headquarters of Smith & Company, Emma Taylor stood under the fluorescent lights of the boardroom, her breath steady but her heart racing. At 29, she was the youngest HR manager in the company's history, a woman whose ambition matched the chill outside. Yet, as she presented her proposal, a radical, anonymous hiring process, she felt the weight of the room's skepticism pressing down on her. The boardroom was a study in contrasts. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the lights, a symbol of tradition and permanence, while the faces of the executives reflected unease. James Smith, the company's founder and CEO, sat at the head of the table, his silver hair neatly combed, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Emma. His reputation for clinging to conventional methods preceded him, and his silence was more unnerving than any criticism. Around him, murmurs of doubt rippled among the other board members, their expressions a mix of incredulity and resistance. But Emma's voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the tension like a blade through ice. When the initiative was reluctantly approved, Emma braced herself for the storm she knew was coming. Over the next few months, the faceless resumes began to flow in. Each application was stripped of identity, reduced to qualifications, experience, and skills. The system was unyielding in its fairness, and when the first round of hires was announced, the results sent shockwaves through the company. Every single hire was black. The revelation was both a triumph and a reckoning. The corridors buzzed with disbelief, whispers carrying the weight of unspoken truths. Emma saw it in their faces, confusion, embarrassment, and, for some, quiet anger. But beneath the surface, she sensed something deeper, the unraveling of a long-standing illusion. The system hadn't failed, it had exposed the biases that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. As the new hires arrived, their presence was electric. They were engineers, analysts, and innovators, their talent undeniable. Yet their arrival marked more than just a change in the workforce, it was a challenge to the very fabric of the company's culture. Emma stood at the precipice of a battle she hadn't fully anticipated, one that would force everyone, herself included, to confront the shadows of prejudice lurking in their midst. And as the winter sun began to melt the frost outside, Emma realized this was only the beginning. The story unfolds in the sprawling expanse of Arendril, a fractured world where towering crystal spires pierce the sky and glowing rivers of molten light carve through a barren, ash-gray landscape. Once a thriving realm of lush forests and vibrant cities, Arendril was shattered by the Sundering, a catastrophic event that left the land scarred and its people divided. Now, remnants of civilization cling to survival in isolated enclaves, surrounded by wild, untamed lands teeming with strange, bioluminescent flora and predatory creatures mutated by the Sundering's lingering magic. Kale is a hardened scavenger from the settlement of Verhold, a crumbling fortress perched on the edge of a glowing chasm. Orphaned during the Sundering, Kale has spent his life navigating the treacherous ruins of the old world, searching for relics of the past to trade for food and supplies. His stoic demeanor masks a deep-seated guilt over the loss of his younger sister, who vanished during the chaos of the Sundering. Kale's sole motivation is survival, though whispers of a way to reverse the Sundering ignite a flicker of hope he tries to suppress. Lyra, a wandering scholar, arrives in Verhold seeking forgotten knowledge. She is a former acolyte of the Luminal Order, a secretive group devoted to studying the Sundering's effects. Lyra's curiosity and idealism often put her at odds with Kale's pragmatism. She possesses a unique ability to sense residual magic, which she believes could guide her to the source of the Sundering. Her motivations are both personal and altruistic, as she hopes to atone for the Order's role in triggering the catastrophe. Despite their differences, Kale and Lyra form an uneasy alliance when they discover a shared connection to an ancient artifact. As they venture beyond Verold, their clashing personalities and hidden traumas create tension, but also the potential for trust. Together, they must navigate a world of danger, mystery, and fragile hope. As tensions rose within Smith and Company, Emma discovered a shocking secret buried in the company's archives. The hiring system she had replaced had been deliberately manipulated for years to favor a select group tied to the CEO's personal network. Confronting James Smith in private, she demanded accountability, but his cryptic warning hinted at deeper, more dangerous truths lurking beneath the surface. The small coastal town of Marlow is abuzz with the annual regatta just weeks away, but for siblings Clara and Ethan, the stakes are higher than a mere trophy. Their late father's boatyard, now teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, depends on their ability to restore and race his prized sailboat, the North Star. Clara, a meticulous planner, sees the regatta as their last chance to attract investors, while Ethan, impulsive but resourceful, is determined to honor their father's legacy. Their shared goal is clear, but their contrasting approaches spark tension. Their first obstacle arises when they discover the boat's mast is cracked, and the repair costs exceed their dwindling funds. Clara suggests selling some of their father's old tools to cover the expense, but Ethan refuses, seeing the tools as sentimental artifacts. Their disagreement escalates, threatening their fragile partnership. Meanwhile, their childhood friend and local mechanic, Sam, offers to help with the repairs in exchange for a favor. Sam needs Clara's help convincing the town council to approve a permit for his small business expansion. Reluctantly, Clara agrees, though it adds another layer of pressure to her already full plate. As they work on the boat, Clara and Ethan begin to reconnect, reminiscing about summers spent sailing with their father. Their shared memories deepen their bond, but unresolved grief still lingers, manifesting in moments of frustration and silence. Sam's presence introduces a subplot of budding romance with Clara, though her focus on saving the boatyard leaves little room for personal distractions. Ethan, on the other hand, finds an unexpected ally in Lila, a young artist who offers to design the boat's sails in exchange for studio space in the boatyard. As the regatta approaches, the siblings face mounting challenges, financial strain, emotional wounds, and the looming threat of losing the boatyard. Yet, their determination grows, setting the stage for a journey of resilience, reconciliation, and unexpected alliances. The morning began like any other in the quiet town of Eldermere, with its cobblestone streets bathed in golden sunlight and the hum of daily life echoing softly. For Clara, a reserved librarian with a penchant for routine, the day promised nothing out of the ordinary. But as she unlocked the doors to the town's century-old library, a sealed envelope lay conspicuously on the threshold, its edges singed, its surface marked with an unfamiliar, intricate seal. Clara hesitated, the air around her suddenly feeling heavier, as though the universe itself had shifted. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of parchment, the handwriting jagged and urgent. It warned of an impending catastrophe. A relic, long hidden beneath the library's foundations, had been disturbed. The note claimed that unless it was recovered and secured by nightfall, the town, and possibly more, would face irreversible destruction. Clara's pulse quickened as she reread the message, her mind racing to dismiss it as a cruel prank. Yet, a faint rumble beneath her feet told her otherwise. The ground trembled, just enough to confirm that something had indeed been set in motion. As Clara scrambled to make sense of the cryptic warning, the library's main door flew open. A disheveled man, his face streaked with dirt and his clothes torn, stumbled in. He introduced himself as Elias, a historian who had been researching the town's buried secrets. Breathless, he revealed that during a recent excavation, he and his team had inadvertently unearthed the relic mentioned in the note. Now, shadows, literal, moving shadows, were pursuing him, growing bolder with each passing hour. Clara's skepticism dissolved as the library's lights flickered ominously, and a chilling whisper seemed to emanate from the walls. With the clock ticking and the ground trembling more violently, Clara and Elias were left with no choice. Their mundane lives were shattered, replaced by an urgent mission to uncover the truth, confront the unknown, and save their town from the looming threat. The aftermath of the hiring announcement rippled through Smith and Company. While some employees celebrated the bold step toward fairness, others exchanged uneasy glances by the water cooler. Whispers of favoritism and reverse discrimination began to circulate, fueled by the anonymous nature of the process. Emma, however, remained steadfast, determined to address the brewing unrest with transparency and dialogue. Among the new hires was Marcus Grant, a software engineer with a reputation for brilliance but a career stunted by systemic bias. Marcus had spent years watching less qualified peers climb corporate ladders while he remained overlooked. His arrival at Smith and Company. He wasn't alone in this experience. Several of his fellow new hires felt the same invisible wall. Emma decided to host a company-wide meeting to address the growing unease. She enlisted the help of her closest ally, Priya Patel, the head of the Diversity and Inclusion Department. Priya, a sharp and empathetic leader, had long advocated for change within the company but had often been sidelined. Together, they planned an open forum where employees could voice their concerns and share their perspectives, hoping to foster understanding. Meanwhile, James Smith, the CEO, found himself grappling with an internal conflict. He had initially approved Emma's proposal as a calculated risk, assuming it would yield safe, predictable results. Now, faced with an outcome that challenged his deeply ingrained beliefs, he began to question whether his resistance to change had been rooted in fear rather than logic. His quiet introspection contrasted sharply with the growing unrest among his executive team, some of whom were openly critical of Emma's initiative. As the forum approached, tensions reached a boiling point. An anonymous email circulated among employees, accusing the company of abandoning its values and labeling the new hires as diversity hires unworthy of their positions. Emma was shaken but resolved to confront the issue head-on. She realized this wasn't just about hiring practices, it was about dismantling a culture of bias that had thrived in silence for far too long. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test Emma's resolve, the company's unity, and the strength of the new hires. The anonymous hiring process had sparked a storm within Smith and Company. Emma quickly found herself at the center of it. The new hires, though undeniably qualified, became the subject of relentless scrutiny. Some employees whispered that the system was flawed, while others openly questioned whether the process had been fair. Emma felt the walls closing in as the tension escalated. The company's diversity initiative, meant to be a step forward, was now a lightning rod for controversy. James Smith, the CEO, called Emma into his office. His tone was sharp, his words cutting. "Do you see what you've done? The board is furious. They think this is a PR disaster waiting to happen." Emma stood her ground, though her palms were clammy. "This isn't about PR, James. It's about fairness. The system worked. If the results make people uncomfortable, maybe it's time we question why." Meanwhile, the new hires faced their own challenges. Assigned to various departments, they quickly realized that their presence was met with resistance. Subtle but undeniable microaggressions crept into their daily interactions, dismissive comments, exclusion from meetings, and an unspoken expectation to prove they belonged. Among them was Marcus, a brilliant software engineer who found himself clashing with his manager, a senior employee who seemed intent on undermining him at every turn. Marcus confided in Emma, his frustration evident. "I thought this company wanted change, but it feels like they're waiting for us to fail." Emma's allies within the company were few, but one of them was Clara, a mid-level manager who had long been critical of the company's hiring practices. Together, they began to strategize ways to support the new hires while addressing the growing unrest among the staff. But Clara had her own battles. Her department was underperforming, and the pressure from above made her position precarious. Helping Emma could jeopardize her career. As tensions mounted, an anonymous email circulated among employees, accusing the company of reverse discrimination. The email's tone was incendiary, and its implications were clear. The anonymous hiring process was under attack. Emma knew she had to act quickly, but every move she made seemed to deepen the divide. The stakes were rising, and the path forward was anything but clear. The winter months gave way to spring, but the chill of uncertainty lingered within the walls of Smith & Company. Emma Taylor, though lauded by some for her bold initiative, found herself at the center of a growing storm. The anonymous hiring process had exposed an uncomfortable truth, one that many were unwilling to confront. The executives, particularly James Smith, were grappling with the implications of the results. For years, they had prided themselves on their merit-based hiring practices, yet the outcome revealed a glaring disparity that could no longer be ignored. Emma's relationship with James became increasingly strained. Once a distant but professional dynamic, their interactions were now marked by tension. James, feeling his authority threatened, began questioning Emma's motives. "Do you think this is sustainable? You've turned this company into a social experiment." Emma, her voice steady but her hands trembling, responded, "This isn't an experiment. It's justice." Meanwhile, the new hires faced their own challenges. Though exceptionally skilled, they were met with skepticism and, at times, outright hostility from their colleagues. Some microaggressions crept into daily interactions, dismissive remarks, exclusion from key meetings, and whispered doubts about their qualifications. Emma, recognizing the growing divide, organized workshops on unconscious bias, but attendance was sparse, and the resistance palpable. One evening, Emma stayed late in the office, reviewing performance reports. The data was irrefutable. The new hires were excelling, outperforming many of their peers. Yet, the backlash persisted. She realized that the issue wasn't just about hiring practices, it was about dismantling a culture that had thrived on unspoken biases for decades. This was no longer just a professional mission, it had become deeply personal. The turning point came when one of the new hires, a software engineer named Marcus, discovered that a senior manager had been deliberately withholding resources from his team. Emma confronted the manager in a tense meeting, exposing the sabotage. James, who had been observing from the sidelines, was forced to intervene. For the first time, he seemed to waver, acknowledging that the company's problems ran deeper than he had admitted. As Emma left the meeting, her resolve hardened. She understood that the fight ahead would demand more than policy changes. It would require courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to stand alone. The path to equality was fraught with obstacles, but Emma was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The winter sun filtered through the frosted windows of Smith & Company. Emma walked briskly down the hallway, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The anonymous hiring process had ignited an internal storm, and the tension was far from subsiding. She had anticipated resistance, but the magnitude of the backlash was staggering. Whispers of dissent grew louder, and even some of her closest colleagues began to question her intentions. Yet Emma remained resolute, knowing that change was never easy. One by one, the new hires settled into their roles, proving themselves with exceptional competence. Their performance was undeniable, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. Subtle microaggressions surfaced, missed invitations to meetings, dismissive comments, and the occasional accidental oversight. Emma noticed everything, her heart sinking as she realized how deeply rooted the biases were. She knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. Her unexpected ally came in the form of Daniel Carter, the company's head of operations. Known for his pragmatic approach and sharp wit, Daniel had initially been one of Emma's skeptics. But after reviewing the new hire's work, he became an outspoken advocate for the initiative. "If this is what merit looks like, we've been doing it wrong for years," he admitted during a heated discussion with the other executives. His support lent Emma the credibility she desperately needed, but it also painted a target on his back. Meanwhile, cracks began to form within the executive team. Sarah Whitman, the head of marketing, who had always been vocal about diversity, began to distance herself from Emma. Her once supportive comments turned into cautious neutrality, and Emma couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Sarah was aligning herself with James Smith. The CEO's silence since the hiring results had been unnerving, and Emma sensed he was biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One evening, as Emma prepared to leave the office, she found an anonymous note on her desk. "Watch your back," it read in bold, ominous letters. Her pulse quickened, but she tucked the note into her bag without a word. Fear threatened to creep in, but she pushed it aside. There was too much at stake to falter now. The first minor victory came when the company's quarterly performance report showed a noticeable improvement. The new hires had contributed to a surge in productivity, silencing some of the louder critics. But Emma knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The real battle wasn't about numbers, it was about dismantling a culture that thrived on exclusion. And as she stared out at the snow-covered streets that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. The winter air outside was biting, but the atmosphere within the company was far colder. Emma Taylor sat in her office, her mind racing as she reviewed the latest reports. The anonymous hiring process had not only exposed the biases of the past but also ignited a storm she hadn't fully anticipated. Whispers of discontent had grown louder, and resistance from some of the senior staff was becoming more overt. Meetings were tense, with veiled criticisms and passive-aggressive remarks aimed at the new hires. Emma had expected challenges, but the hostility brewing within the company threatened to undermine everything she had worked for. James Smith, the CEO, was no longer silent. His initial reluctance had evolved into a simmering frustration. He called Emma into his office, his tone sharp and accusatory. "This isn't what we agreed to," he said, pointing to the growing divide among employees. He demanded answers, questioning whether the process had been manipulated. Emma stood her ground, explaining the integrity of the system, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. For the first time, she felt the weight of isolation, realizing that even those who had reluctantly supported her were beginning to waver. Meanwhile, the new hires were facing their own battles. Despite their qualifications, they were met with skepticism and, in some cases, outright hostility. Subtle acts of exclusion, Missed invitations to meetings, withheld information, began to surface. One of the new hires, a brilliant software engineer named Marcus, confided in Emma about the growing tension. "I feel like we're being set up to fail," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. Emma knew he wasn't wrong. The company's culture was pushing back, resisting change at every turn. As the pressure mounted, Emma found herself questioning whether she had underestimated the scale of the challenge. She began to doubt whether the company was ready to confront the truth about itself. But just as despair threatened to take hold, she received an unexpected email from a junior employee, a heartfelt message of support, thanking her for giving people like them a chance. It was a small glimmer of hope, but it reminded Emma why she had started this fight. With the annual board meeting approaching, Emma knew she had one last chance to prove the value of the new system. She began preparing a presentation, gathering data to show the undeniable success of the new hires. But more than numbers, she needed to appeal to something deeper, the humanity of those in power. As the deadline loomed, Emma reached out to Marcus and the other new hires, asking them to share their experiences. Together, they crafted a narrative that was both raw and inspiring, a testament to resilience in the face of adversity. The final days before the meeting were fraught with tension. Emma worked late into the night, her determination unwavering even as the obstacles seemed insurmountable. She knew that the upcoming presentation would be the turning point. It was no longer just about the hiring process, it was about the soul of the company and whether it could rise above its past. Every thread of the story was converging, and Emma could feel the weight of what was to come. The boardroom was charged with tension as Emma Taylor faced her final confrontation with CEO James Smith. Months after the anonymous hiring process had reshaped the company's workforce, the backlash had reached its peak. Some executives accused Emma of orchestrating a hidden agenda, while others demanded the system be dismantled. James, who had remained silent throughout the storm, finally called Emma into a private meeting. His tone was sharp, his words laced with skepticism, but Emma stood firm. She presented undeniable data. Productivity had risen, employee satisfaction had improved, and the company's public image had never been stronger. For the first time, James faltered, his traditional views cracking under the weight of evidence. Meanwhile, the new hires faced their own battles. Despite their qualifications, they were met with subtle hostility from some colleagues. Microaggressions and whispered doubts lingered in the air. Yet, they persevered, proving their worth through sheer excellence. One of them, Marcus Reed, a brilliant software developer, uncovered a major flaw in the company's flagship product, saving the firm millions. His achievement silenced many critics and became a turning point for the team. Slowly, their contributions began to shift perceptions, forcing even the staunchest skeptics to reconsider their biases. Emma's journey, however, was far from over. She confronted her own doubts, wondering if the change she fought for could truly last. In a heartfelt conversation with Marcus, she admitted her fears. Marcus, in turn, reminded her that change was never easy, but it was necessary. "The system isn't perfect," he said, "but you gave us a chance. That's more than anyone else ever did." In the end, James publicly acknowledged the success of the initiative, surprising everyone. He announced plans to expand the anonymous hiring process to other departments and personally thanked Emma for her vision. As the company moved forward, Emma stood at the forefront, determined to continue dismantling systemic biases. Her call to action was clear: challenge what you think you know. Change starts with courage. The story closed not with finality, but with hope, a reminder that true progress is a journey, not a destination. Months turned into a year, in the anonymous hiring process at Smith & Company. The initial shock of the all-black cohort gave way to curiosity, then respect, as the new hires excelled in their roles. Emma watched with quiet satisfaction as the data spoke for itself. Productivity soared, innovation flourished, and employee morale reached unprecedented levels. Yet, the journey was far from over. Beneath the surface, resistance simmered. Some employees whispered about diversity hires, while others questioned the merit of the process. Emma knew that systemic change required more than policy, it demanded education and empathy. Determined to address the lingering biases, Emma spearheaded workshops and open forums, creating spaces for honest dialogue. It wasn't easy. Some resisted, clinging to old prejudices, while others embraced the opportunity to grow. Slowly but surely, the walls of ignorance began to crumble. James Smith, the once skeptical CEO, surprised everyone by attending one of the workshops. His transformation was gradual but genuine. He began to see the value of Emma's vision, not just in numbers but in the human stories that unfolded within the company. For the new hires, the journey was equally transformative. They faced challenges, microaggressions, doubts, and the pressure to prove themselves, but they also found camaraderie and strength in their shared experience. Each success they achieved became a testament to their resilience and the power of equal opportunity. Emma, too, evolved. What began as a professional mission became deeply personal, shaping her into a leader who understood the importance of persistence, compassion, and courage. As Emma stood in the boardroom a year later, presenting the undeniable success of the initiative, she concluded with a challenge: let this be a beginning, not an end. True equality is not a destination but a journey we must commit to every day. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Emma saw hope in the eyes of her colleagues. Smith & Company. And as Emma walked out of the boardroom, she smiled, knowing the fight for equality was far from over, but now, she wasn't fighting alone.